Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Hello, and welcome to our webinar, 100 Days to a Next Level Customer Experience Program. We are going to give a few more minutes for people to join us before starting the official presentation. So we'll start in maybe about 2 minutes. Off our webinar, 100 Days to a Next Level CX Program. My name is Connie Harrington, and I am a marketing consultant in the customer experience industry. We wanted to welcome you to our webinar and thank you for spending time with us today to learn about customer experience best practices. A few quick housekeeping notes before we get started. You can feel free to submit questions at any time throughout the webinar using the questions feature. Those will be sent directly to us. We are planning a Q&A session at the end, and we will do our best to answer all of the questions that come in at that time. Also, by registering for our webinar, your company is eligible to receive a strategy assessment from our CX experts. After today's session, we will be contacting you to sign up for your strategy session, and we will also be providing you the replay of this webinar. I'm now going to introduce our two speakers for the day, Chip James and David Farshon, who will walk you through the presentation. First up is Chip James. He is president of eTouchpoint. Chip has more than 20 years in the technology and software as a service sector. He has more than 12 years leading customer experience organizations. He is a frequent customer experience speaker and contributor on industry best practices, CX feedback gathering, and CX software platforms. We also have with us today David Farshon, who is our senior manager of customer experience. Dave has more than 17 years leading product development and implementation of data-driven decision-making software solutions. He has 7 years implementing and optimizing customer experience programs with Fortune 2000 clients. And he is a customer experience subject matter expert in transactional survey design, IVR, email, and SMS surveying, along with CX segmentation and data analysis. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chip James to kick off the discussion.
Thanks for the introductions, Connie. And I wanted to take a minute to thank everyone for joining us today. We know how tight calendars are, and we appreciate you taking 45 minutes or so out of your day to talk customer experience with us. Today's presentation is built around what we view to be the 4 main building blocks for customer experience success. For those of you who work in customer experience on a daily basis, you know that the term CX or customer experience can mean many different things in 2018. It means things like customer journey mapping, process optimization, transactional and relationship surveys, and even internal efforts to try to optimize making an organization culturally more customer focused. So we're not going to be talking about many of those items today. We're really going to be focused on the practical and operational ingredients behind a successful customer experience transactional survey program. And so we're going to talk about those operational and practical things that can be implemented fairly quickly and can help organizations accelerate their customer experience efforts. So the 4 building blocks that we'll be focused on are the CX feedback gathering and the process around collecting data from customers, CX reporting and the process behind building effective reports that will be used by the user community. The 3rd building block is closed loop alerting and the process of following up with customers who've had something very negative to say through a survey interaction. And then finally, the 4th building block is customer verbatim analytics and the process of mining the open-ended written and spoken feedback that comes in from customers through transactional and relationship surveys. For each building block, we will go through a primer of that area or a process overview of that area as it exists in 2018. We'll provide lots of best practices and recommendations for each building block. And then where appropriate, we'll include some metrics and other considerations for benchmarking or just consideration for you as you're looking at your internal CX process and ways to improve it. And as Connie mentioned, we will have a Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions, feel free at any time during the presentation to add those questions through the GoToWebinar application. Those will queue up and we'll be able to see those, and we'll get through as many as we can at the end of the presentation. I wanted to make one other quick comment before we get started. You'll see references to Sky Creek on this presentation. Sky Creek is the parent organization. eTouchPoint that Dave and I work with is our customer experience branch or organization within the Sky Creek umbrella. So you'll see references to Sky Creek and eTouchPoint, but eTouchPoint is the product and the organization that we'll be talking about today, and it's the organization that supports all of our customer experience clients. So with that, let's dive into it. The first building block we're going to talk about is feedback gathering and the process of gathering actionable data from customers after an interaction with a frontline employee. So there are three main modes currently being used in 2018 to collect feedback from customers. The first is what we call IVR, or interactive voice response applications. Those are automated telephone applications that use professionally recorded voice prompts to gather feedback from customers. So the way that technology works is that an IVR survey application is built that includes an opening, introducing why we're contacting the customer. It includes the survey questions. It includes a closing thank you. That application is configured to contact customers after an interaction with a frontline employee. And then the application goes through all the logic and the branching and the survey questions to gather feedback from customers in a highly personalized and professional but automated manner. Those applications can be configured to be done through outbound calling, where customers are contacted directly, or through an inbound number where customers can call into an 800 number and go through that same application in an automated fashion to provide feedback on a brand or a recent interaction. The most prominent mode of feedback gathering, at least in the United States in 2018, is still email and web. And the idea behind email and web is that there is an email that goes out that's a call to action to the customer after a recent interaction. That email includes usually an introduction. It's normally branded, includes some other content about why the company is contacting the customer. And then there is usually a link or a question embedded in that email that the customer can click to kick off the process of providing feedback. And then the third primary mode in the US in 2018 for gathering feedback from customers is through SMS and mobile. There are two primary methodologies currently in place to gather feedback from customers using mobile technologies. The first is a rapid back and forth question and answer type approach, where a customer will receive a text message soon after an interaction with a frontline employee or with a brand. That message will say something to the effect of, we're contacting you about your recent interaction. We would love to get some feedback about how things went. Reply why to continue. If the customer replies with a why, they will then get the first question on the survey. They'll answer that question. They'll then get the second question. So it's a rapid fire back and forth that usually takes under a minute for the customer to complete. The other approach that's being used is an initial SMS message is sent out to the customer after the transaction, and that message will include a link to a mobile phone-enabled survey. The customer can click that link. The web survey will open up on their mobile phone, and they can click through and complete the survey in that manner. Some other methods that are still being used or currently being used for gathering feedback. Website pop-ups are a common form of feedback gathering to collect feedback from customers after they've been on a website or after they've had some kind of web transaction. In the retail environment, many companies are still using some form of a kiosk or a tablet. And then we even today have clients who are using or migrating away from paper and more manual forms of gathering feedback. So let's take a look at the benefits and drawbacks and a general comparison of these three primary modes of gathering feedback. One of the questions that we often get from customers when we're talking to them about these different modes and they're making decisions on which modes to use is, well, what kind of response rates can we expect? For IVR, we have seen historically response rates between 15 and 25%. For web and email, somewhere between 3 and 12%, and for SMS, somewhere between 20 and 35%. These are general ranges. These numbers can vary for one-off programs. Response rates are impacted by many, many things like the demographic, the type of transaction or interaction that took place. For example, a human-to-human interaction in person will get a higher response rate than a human-to-human interaction over the phone. Retail transactions are going to get lower response rates because there's not a big human connection generally in those transactions. So a lot of things can vary the numbers, but generally speaking, these are the ranges that we see for these types of modes and the many programs that we've run with clients over the years. In terms of the key benefits for these different modes, for IVR and SMS, the primary benefit compared to web and email is that IVR and SMS have very strong calls to action. We're contacting customers on their telephone or on their handset. And as a result, you're going to get higher response rates for those programs because the call to action is so powerful. For IVR applications, those applications and SMS as well, and email to an extent, they can also be configured to contact customers multiple times. The more times you contact a customer, the higher you would expect your response rates to be. So those are a couple of the key benefits of IVR and SMS. On the web and email side, they're easier. Those applications are easier to configure, and they're generally more expensive than IVR. I'm sorry, they're more inexpensive or less expensive than IVR and SMS. Web and email has the added benefit of not being as intrusive to customers. So that means that customers can ignore the email in their inbox, or they can easily delete it. It's not a strong call to action directly to their telephone, so it's less intrusive. That provides a little bit better customer experience. And web and email are simpler forms of feedback modes for customers, because customers can visually see the form on their computer or their handset. They've got the time that they need to read the questions and review the questions. You don't often get that same level of understanding or ease with IVR and SMS. In terms of the drawbacks for these three modes, the setup costs for IVR and SMS are generally higher than for web and email, so cost is certainly a consideration. IVR and SMS are more intrusive to the customer because we're contacting them directly and maybe interrupting something that they're doing. And then for IVR, it's a more time-intensive process. IVR surveys take a little bit longer than web or SMS. And on the SMS side, the TCPA and other opt-in regulations provide some complications in using that method, at least in the United States. For web and email, the primary drawback, and it's a very big one, is that response rates are lower than the other options. Any of you who are currently managing customer experience programs know that data and data points are the primary building blocks for all customer experience programs. So getting less data is generally a bad thing, and you're normally going to get fewer data points from a web and email feedback collection mode than you will for IVR and SMS. A couple of other quick considerations. We talked about the call to action being much stronger for IVR and SMS than it is for web and email. That's going to translate into higher response rates for those modes. In the US, the adoption for IVR and web and email feedback modes has been pretty high. For SMS, it's low, but it is growing. We saw adoption of SMS surveys internationally 7, 8, 9 years ago. The US has been very slow because of the TCPA and because of some of the opt-in rules, but we are seeing that starting to change, and brands are getting more aggressive about surveying and generally just contacting customers through their SMS capabilities and through their mobile handset. And in terms of cost, this is a consideration. IVR and SMS, as I mentioned, are more expensive to configure and maintain than web and email. But in the grand scheme of a customer experience program where you've got staff and you've got headcount and you've got analytics platforms and many other things that go into those programs, the cost of gathering IVR and SMS feedback is fairly nominal in the grand scheme of the business case. So we generally recommend to clients they look very closely at that IVR and SMS, and over time, the cost is not going to be that great compared to the overall cost of their customer experience efforts. Okay, so let's close out this building block with some best practices and recommendations for feedback gathering. First and foremost, it's important to offer feedback options for customers at every touch point they have with the brand. Historically, companies that were engaged in customer experience practices focused on providing feedback options for their primary service channels. That means generally the field service organization and the call center organization. But today, customers are touching brands in many other places, including websites, chat support, automated support, mobile applications. And there could be things going on in those areas that are leading to customers being dissatisfied or leading to some breaking points in the relationship between the customer and the brand. So it's important in the customer experience ecosystem and when you're building out this customer experience strategy to at least put plans in place to gather feedback anywhere a customer may touch your brand at any point in time. We recommend that our clients link their feedback mode to the business transaction. And what that means is that for human-to-human interactions like call center and field interactions, where there's voice or human-to-human personal interaction, IVR is the go-to method for feedback because it's more personalized and you're going to get higher response rates because the call to action is much stronger. SMS is another option there, but we usually advise clients to lead with an IVR feedback gathering mode for call center and field service organizations. For retail, email feedback gathering and SMS gathering are very good modes to consider, and for chat, a pop-up survey option or an email survey option usually work well in those scenarios. Survey design, we talked about before that data are the most critical components to an effective customer experience program. A big part of gathering data is the survey instrument, and the design of that survey is absolutely critical in getting statistically valid and high volumes of feedback into that customer experience program. One of the challenges with transactional surveys is that there are a lot of things that brands want to know about their customers. There might be marketing questions they want to ask or demographic questions they want to ask on transactional surveys, but it's really important to keep these transactional surveys brief and ensure that every question on the survey meets two criteria. The first criteria is the question important to the customer? Is it something that the customer cares about? And the second criteria is, can we do something with that data once it's collected? At each touch point, when we're working with clients on survey design, that's one of the main questions we ask the client is, okay, if you include this question on the survey, what will you do with that data once you have it? And if the answer is, I don't know or nothing, then that question should be removed from the survey. It's really, really important to keep these surveys to the point, to be cognizant of the time that we're asking customers to provide to us and ensure that the data that we're collecting are very actionable data points. It's important to gather feedback as soon as possible after an interaction. Providing feedback is an emotional response. When customers provide feedback, they usually do so because they're very, very happy about something that happened or they're very disappointed about something that happened. That emotion wanes over time. So if we get 48 hours or 72 hours out from a transaction, customers are going to be less inclined to provide feedback because they're less emotional. It's really important to give customers the option to collect feedback minutes or within 24 hours after the transaction has taken place. And a couple of quick recommendations. So for transactional surveys, 5 to 8 questions are plenty. For IVR, it should be around 2 minutes in length. For web and SMS, those surveys would translate to about a minute or less for the customer. Always offer an open-ended option. In all of the surveys that we design for our clients, there's at least one, usually just one, open-ended, unstructured, written or spoken feedback option for the customer. The reason that we do that is that you can't always capture the essence of a transaction through quantitative structured survey questions. So it's nice to give customers that option to tell you in their own spoken word the positive things or the negative things that happened in their recent interaction. And then we're also seeing, and we're starting to recommend to clients, but we're seeing a big move in all industries to ask customers for their contact preferences. Everyone on this call has probably seen at some point in time or have been asked by their brands and their service providers, how would you like us to contact you? It's important to ask customers those questions across not only just the service campaigns. We have a question about your service, how should we contact you, but also for marketing reasons. And then over time to put strategies in place to actually use those preferences. That's going to ensure that the engagement rate is much higher across all the contact programs that are in place. It's also going to ensure that we're collecting more data for our transactional survey programs. Okay, so that concludes building block 1. I'm going to turn things over to David so that he can walk us through the process of building effective customer experience reports.
Hey, Chip. So for building block 2, building effective CX reports, we wanted to take a look at basically selecting a KPI to measure overall customer satisfaction. And when selecting a key performance indicator or KPI, many of our clients select things such as likelihood to recommend, customer effort, or overall satisfaction. This KPI and whether or not the issue was successfully resolved to the customer satisfaction typically tend to be the criteria that our customers use to identify dissatisfied customers. And we'll be talking a little bit more about the closed loop alerting process later in this presentation. Another thing with the KPI is it's something that allows you to benchmark performance internally and externally. CX leaders consistently benchmark their performance internally, and that allows you to promote healthy competition among the different groups in your organization and to motivate underperforming teams to meet CX performance goals. External benchmarks are also useful, and they're available through a variety of CX thought leaders and industry groups, and that enables companies to see how their performance on their key performance indicators compared to others. And lastly, when looking at KPIs, it's important to assess performance over a broader time period. Metrics such as likelihood to recommend, customer effort, and overall satisfaction tend to be trailing indicators, which means that specific business events such as major outages, rate increases can have a profound impact on customer perception in the weeks and months after they occur. So in combination with the key performance indicator, it's important to identify performance-based metrics that impact CX. And Chip talked a little bit about this when he was talking about the surveys. CX leaders recognize the importance of pairing the KPI with operational metrics that can be used to drive performance improvement across the organization. When selecting operational metrics, focus on metrics that matter to your customers. Many companies will choose to focus on metrics such as jobs or calls completed per day. And while those metrics are important from a performance perspective, they really aren't that important in the eyes of the customer. Because as a customer, all I really care about is that my issue is handled efficiently and that at the end of the day, it was resolved appropriately. So this is some of the reasons why CX leaders choose things like first contact resolution, problem resolution rate, average time to contact, average time to resolve as their key metrics, and then hold their employees accountable to these performance-based CX metrics. Another piece that's important when looking at CX results is the idea of hierarchical reporting. The success of any CX program is dependent upon the communication of its results at all levels and taking actions on these results. These CX programs cannot be conducted just in their own silo or in a vacuum. Really, the clients that we work with, the ones that are most successful, are ones that communicate the results at all levels. Hierarchical reporting allows company leaders to identify improvement opportunities across the company and set performance goals accordingly at a corporate level. And then by looking at the performance of their teams, and as individuals, managers are able to focus their team's attention on what customers' experiences and work with individual employees to recognize their strengths and weaknesses. And these are two important ways to basically move the needle in terms of the customer experience, both from kind of a top-down and a bottom-up methodology. And then kind of to continue that thought, we highly recommend that basically our clients develop ways to push reporting out to the entire organization to engage CX stakeholders. And one way to do that is through kind of weekly reporting. In terms of effective reports, what they do is they show performance over a broader time period and have clear indicators that performance did not meet objectives. So if you're sending out a weekly report showing kind of week over week results or maybe year-to-date results, so that you can take a look at the results for the prior week and see that context over a broader period to tell if you're improving or kind of maintaining status quo, or perhaps declining based on the performance for last week. Many CX leaders also openly share the results across the entire organization so that everyone can see how the results compare to others. And so that's, I think, an important, just kind of open and honest approach that allows everyone to see where they rate in the organization and can take action on their own to improve their results. So we find that this approach actively engages users and promotes a culture of continuous improvement throughout the organization. With that, I'm going to hand things back over to Chip to talk a little bit about building block number 3, closed loop alerting.
Okay, thanks, Dave. So building block 3, closed loop alerting, and the process of following up with customers. We're going to start by just walking through what the closed loop alerting process looks like from the perspective of the internal process, not necessarily the process of following up with the customers, but what should be happening internally for this process. So everything begins with an interaction between a frontline employee and the customer. Once that interaction has taken place, customers are given the opportunity to provide feedback within 24 hours, hopefully using IVR, SMS, or email. Customers provide that feedback. They rate the experience that they had. They rate the transaction. They rate the employee. And then at that point, 2 different things normally happen. The first is that all of the survey data points funnel into a CX reporting application or an internal reporting application or some kind of analytics platform that the field and stakeholders within the organization have access to. The second thing that hopefully is happening is that the alerts that were generated, and the alerts are negative feedback data points. So the customer says, I will not recommend you, or my issue is not resolved. When that alertable event happens, the idea and the goal here behind this process is that that alert information is sent in real time to someone in the field, usually the field manager who manages the employee that was involved in that interaction. So the first part of the closed loop alerting process after a customer has provided negative feedback is to send out in real time, usually in an email, information about that event. So that information, and at each touch point, what we send our clients is the name of the customer, contact information for the customer, their survey responses, the voice or written comments, and then the name of the employee that was involved in the interaction. At that point, the frontline manager has the information that they need to start going down the path of understanding what went wrong and hopefully contacting this customer and making the situation right moving forward. So once the frontline manager has that information, they can follow up with the employee who was involved in the interaction to get more information, and then they can reach out directly to the customer. In many situations, the alerts are not generated if any negative feedback is provided. It's if negative feedback is provided for 1 or 2 key questions on the survey. So the manager has the information, they follow up with the employee, maybe they do some research in an internal work order system, then they contact the customer. And throughout this process, the manager should be updating their alert tracking or workflow system with the steps that they're taking. And then finally, the goal to this process is that it helps the field and the frontline team stay in front of issues. So because we're alerted in real time that an issue has occurred, hopefully the service organization can reach out to that customer before the customer escalates to a CEO hotline, or if it's a regulatory issue, escalates to a regulatory agency, or just calls into the call center, which drives up the cost to service that customer. The goal of this process is to stay in front of issues, hopefully identify some improvements over time that can be done on the front end to prevent these alertable events from happening. And then the idea is that over time, we've got an alert rate that's going down and customer satisfaction levels that are going up. So there are 4 or 5 key elements to putting a closed loop alerting process in place. The first is to have an algorithm that can be configured to generate alerts based on answers to survey questions. So what we have found historically is that an alertable event for a call center might be first call resolution or issue unresolved or rudeness And an alertable event for a field organization might be services are not working. So the technology in place needs to have the ability to configure an alert differently within a given service line or survey program, or in some cases we have clients that want to do like an ANDed survey where you've got 2 questions involved in the alerting calculation. So you need to have some flexibility in generating the alerts across survey types. It's important to have real-time communication going out to the field. This is the real-time emails that we talked about on the last slide. When an alert occurs, the field can't do anything about it if they're not alerted very quickly that there is an issue. So it's important to get real-time communication in the form of an email or a text message out to the field manager who can be responsible for following up with this customer and addressing this issue. An alert workflow management system is also an important element to a successful closed-loop alerting process. This system, as I mentioned before, is used by the field to document their alert follow-ups, and it's not a very time-consuming process. But the idea behind this piece of the process is that a manager can log into a system, they can see their list of alerts, they can make notes about their follow-up activities, they can change the status, and they can hopefully assign a category so that when analysis is done later on, people can understand what the alert was about. The second reason the alert workflow management system is really, really important to this process is that it can be used by management to, over time, identify the trends and the things that are occurring that are causing customers to be frustrated. If the frontline managers are documenting their alert activities and taking notes on the alert activities, then a knowledge base is building over time, and management or the frontline staff can use that information, analyze it on a monthly or quarterly basis, and get a better understanding of why customers are frustrated. Then the organization can engage in some technological improvements or service improvements or process improvements to ensure that the number of issues driving alerts are going down over time. This workflow system is also critical for a second reason, in that it helps companies see which frontline managers are actually engaging in this process. It's holding them accountable because there is a knowledge base that's showing who's following up with customers, who's updating the status, and who's taking notes on their alerts. And then finally, for any process like this, it's important to be able to measure the effectiveness of the process and how the company is doing and hopefully improving over time. So on the note of metrics, we've identified 4 or 5 key metrics that are tracked in the Touchpoint system and that we recommend that our clients promote within their organization and hold their people accountable for over time. The first closed-loop alerting metric is simply a percentage of overall alerts. So out of all the surveys that are coming in, how many are generating an alert? We see a best-in-class rate of about 5%, meaning that if a company has 1,000 surveys completed, they might expect to see about 50 alerts. That's a very good number to strive towards. Average days to act is another important metric. This simply monitors and measures the number of days or hours that it takes a frontline manager to begin acting on an alert, not necessarily to resolve the alert, but to begin acting on the alert. The best-in-class target there is for everyone in the organization to average less than 1 day on initiating action for an alert. Average days to close is another important metric. This tracks the number of days or hours to resolve an alert from the time the alert comes in to the time that it's closed out in the mind of, or the eyes of the customer. The best-in-class number there is about 1.5 days, but what we recommend at each touch point to our customers is that they should have a corporate goal to close out all alerts, 99% of alerts, within 4 business days. And then finally, this is similar to the second metric, average days to act, but we call it Touched in 24. And this measures and monitors the percentage of alerts that are reviewed and initiated, actions initiated within 24 hours. And the clients that do this the best, we see them average about 97%, meaning that 97% of the alerts that come in are acted on within 24-hour or less time frame. So to close out Building Block 3, in terms of best practices and other considerations for a closed-loop alerting process, as I mentioned earlier, it's important to just alert on 1 or 2 strategic survey questions. We've had some clients that have tried to alert on multiple questions, and what we found is that their service organization is just overrun with alerts and they were not able to keep up with their follow-up activities. So generally speaking, if you take one or two key questions on the survey, we generally recommend one like problem resolved or NPS or overall satisfaction, and just start your process with that question and alerting only on that question. That helps build a foundation and work out the kinks in the follow-up processes and all the technology involved. And then over time, that one question can evolve to another question, or it could be an or situation where if we have a negative comment here or here, that would be an alert. A lot of flexibility and a lot of things that can be done over time. But generally speaking, it's better to crawl before we walk or run. And we recommend to our clients alerting on one or two key survey questions per survey. Frontline managers should own the follow-up. There's been some ongoing dialogue in the customer experience industry really for the last 10 years about who's better equipped or who should be managing the closed-loop alerting follow-up activities. Should it be a centralized CSR or CSR team, or should it be the frontline manager involved, whose employee was involved in the interaction? Our recommendation to clients, and I think there's a consensus in the industry now that this is the best approach, but our recommendation is that the frontline manager should own the follow-up. And the reason is that the frontline manager understands that part of the business best. They own the employee who is involved in that transaction, and they're best equipped to not only address the customer's issue, but also resolve the human resource or the employee service issue and work with that employee to ensure that those events don't continue to happen. And that's a level of flexibility and access that a centralized CSR team is generally not going to have for follow-up activities. It's important, well, so in the last 18 months or so, we've seen a trend towards alerting on open-ended verbatim. So what that means is that if a negative comment comes in from a customer, not a negative survey response, but a negative comment written or spoken, it's appropriate to alert on those situations. And technology has started to catch up where many of the CX platforms, and ours included, can generate an alert off of an open-ended negative form of feedback from a customer. The way that works with any touch point is that if a verbatim or open-ended comment from a customer is seen to be negative and it fits into a certain category like competition or cancel or my problem's not resolved, that survey, even if all of the survey questions were answered positively, that survey would still be sent in real time out to a manager to take a look at the feedback and to see if the appropriate follow-up activities are needed. For benchmarking purposes, if you currently have a closed-loop alerting process in place, here's some information that may be of interest. We see the alert rates average 5 to 20%, meaning that 5 to 20% of the surveys that come in will have an alert. So that those numbers, it's a wide range, but it really varies based on best in class at 5% to worst in class at 20%, and everyone else is somewhere in the middle. The touching all alerts within 24 hours, the best in class number there is about 95%, and closing out all alerts within 4 days, we recommend as a best practice to make sure that about 99% of those alerts are closed out within 4 days. We have not talked much about positive feedback. One of the most underutilized forms of feedback in the customer experience industry are positive feedback data points. We've seen historically that 60 to 70% of surveys that come in are positive, but less than 2% of those positive data points are then given back to the field organization in the form of recognition or reward. So there's an enormous opportunity to take a lot of the positive feedback that customers are providing, because a lot of people are doing great work out in the service industry. There's an enormous opportunity to take those positive data points and to get that information out to the field organization in the form of an automated email, or maybe a monthly or quarterly gift card giveaway for top performers. But there are many, many opportunities to use that positive feedback to recognize and reward people for doing a great job, and reinforcing with them that when the process is followed and service is excellent, customers are going to be very happy, and they're going to provide that happiness back through positive survey responses. And then finally, we're seeing a move towards automating closed-loop alerting follow-ups with customers. So the scenarios there really centers around if there is negative feedback from a customer, but it doesn't necessarily constitute the kind of feedback that we would follow up with the customer directly or manually. We can now use technology to automate that follow-up and tell the customer via email in an automated fashion, hey, we got your feedback. We're very appreciative of your time. We understand that we blew it here, and we're working to make things better. So we see, a trend moving forward in closed-loop alerting over the next 2 or 3 years to really increase levels of automation so that we can minimize the impact on the field of having to follow up with customers manually, and we can use technology to service these customers and to follow up with them to ensure that they're happy moving forward. Okay, with that, I'm going to turn things back over to Dave, who's going to take us through the final section of the presentation.
All right, our final building block is number 4, leveraging customer comments. So in terms of one of the biggest challenges with having open-ended customer comments is managing the large amount of information that you get. And so one of the key to any CX program is finding an effective way to make sense of this information. According to a 2017 study by the Temkin Group, 46% of companies are novices or collectors in terms of their voice of the customer maturity, which are the 2 lowest levels out of 5. The study also found that less than 25% of companies have been successful in making changes based on voice of the customer insights. So what we find is that many of these companies focus on using customer comments for identifying and fixing quick hit operational issues versus really taking the time to develop a comprehensive approach for analyzing customer comments. And this includes collaborating on the findings and using the results to transform the experience of customers with their company. What we find is that in terms of the collaborators and the transformers, that these are typically associated with leading CX companies that show higher levels of voice of the customer competency and maturity. So one of the challenges with open-ended customer comments and transactional survey design is really kind of goes back to the design of the survey. So some of the best practices that we found that work best for clients with regard to this is that instead of using customer comments as a catch-all, consider designing your survey to elicit comments that are meaningful and actionable. Just like you do with the questions, find ways to make it pertinent to the customer and based on the information that the customer provides, be able to funnel that back into the organization. So one way to do this is to focus the feedback on the specific interaction that's being surveyed. An example of this is if the survey is targeted towards the interaction with field employees, reinforce the fact that the comment should be about the customer's interaction with that field employee. And what this does is it focuses the customer on that interaction versus maybe a billing issue or something that may have affected the customer previously. And then another approach that's worked well for some of our clients is to target the comment based on the customer's response to a specific question on the survey. So taking the opportunity to ask the customers, what's the one thing that the company could have done differently when they respond negatively to a key question? Another question I get a lot when implementing these types of surveys with clients is it better to include the comment at the beginning or the end of the survey? And as you'd expect, there's no perfect answer, and the location of the comment question at the beginning may influence the customer's responses to the rest of the quantitative or closed-ended questions on the survey, and vice versa. And while there isn't really a definitive best practice with regard to this, what we found is that many would recommend that if you're using a key question like likelihood to recommend, that be asked at the beginning of the survey, followed by the comment, which would be, please provide the reason for your response. So that's an example, kind of tying the comment to the question and getting some specific feedback on why they would recommend or not recommend your company. However, in the case of a kind of a more general comment about the employee or the company, we typically include those at the end of the survey after all of the quantitative survey questions are asked. And then lastly, we find that multiple comments do not yield better feedback. A lot of our clients want to include a comment at the beginning and a comment at the end, and what we found is that customers typically repeat the same themes in both comments, and that the additional cost associated with not only the IVR to kind of speak those extra comment prompts, but also the cost associated with transcription and sentiment analysis, that typically outweighs the benefits and just adds more to the workload of the employees that are reviewing these comments and acting on the transcription alerts that go along with them. Another area that's a popular topic right now is kind of the benefits of human-based versus machine-based transcription. Obviously, with collecting these customer comments, one of the benefits is finding a way to leverage these comments by transcribing, rating, and categorizing them to make the feedback easier to act on. What we found is that despite recent advancements in language algorithms that have greatly improved the accuracy of the machine-based transcription, human-based transcription is still better with regard to its accuracy and processing. I think one of the main drivers for machine-based transcriptions is that it can be faster and cheaper, but it cannot compete with the ability of humans to really understand subtle emotional and linguistic cues. Also, humans are better able to work around real-world conditions like background noise, kind of thick accents, and colloquialisms in the language. So that makes it more beneficial for a human-based transcription process. Also, another benefit of human-based transcriptions is really in kind of the processing of the comments. They're more accurate, be able to determine the overall sentiment. They categorize the comments by different themes versus relying on very specific keywords for the categorization. And also, I think they're better at escalating critical concerns that could be overlooked by kind of the keyword-based, machine-based algorithms. And then for programs that are conducted in multiple languages, basically having a human-based transcriber who's proficient in the language, they're able to leverage their cultural knowledge of the language to more accurately translate the comment. And so these are some of the reasons why we recommend kind of a human-based transcription approach currently compared to machine-based transcriptions. And in general, I think when accuracy of the information is important, the human-based transcription solution will provide significantly better results. If you're just trying to get maybe 80% of the content and care less about accuracy, then a machine-based transcription process might be appropriate for your business needs. In terms of analytical tools for evaluating customer comments, some of the best practices that we see our clients use to report open-ended customer feedback to stakeholders. The first is the concept of kind of a positive to negative plus mixed ratio. And what this is basically taking a look at the number of positive comments in relationship to comments that were clearly negative and comments that maybe had a combination of positive and negative sentiment when they were left. And what we find is that top performing companies typically receive about 3 to 4 positive comments for every negative comment. Chip talked a little bit about the idea of really focusing on the positive. What we find is that CX leaders are not only focusing on kind of the opportunities for improvement, but they also see the benefit of recognizing exceptional employees and the positive impact that they have on the customer experience. And so we worked with one of our clients to devise a system where employees actually receive commendation letters based on the comments that customers leave. And so what we do is we take a look at their quantitative survey results, and if they received a perfect score across all the questions, and then the comment that was left by the customer was kind of extremely satisfied, what we'll do is we'll flag those as exceptional comments, and we can send out commendation letters to those individuals. And what we find is that there's really some healthy competition there amongst the employees, and that those letters are definitely kind of a badge of honor amongst the group. A lot of times when looking at customer comments, kind of the initial foray into analyzing the information is just really looking at whether customer comments are positive, negative, mixed, or neutral. And that's really the first step in understanding customer sentiment at a high level. The leading CX companies tend to take this one step further by categorizing the themes that customers comment on so that they can better understand where the opportunities are for improvement. And when evaluating different negative categories, one thing to consider is their impact on your key performance indicator. What we found is we actually have a reporting touch point that takes a look at this, and it's surprising to see that some of the negative categories have a relatively small effect on that KPI, whereas others have a much more profound impact. And so using online tools, it makes it easy to kind of identify where you're going to get the best bang for the buck. And so by focusing on the themes that have the most impact, you can tend to move the needle in terms of customer experience faster. With that, I'm going to turn things back over to Connie to facilitate our question and answer period.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you to Chip also for an informative presentation. We're going to move on to the Q&A portion of the webinar. We do have a few questions that came in during the presentation, and we also invite anybody with questions to submit them now as well. So one of the questions came in during the feedback gathering section, Chip, and it is, can you talk about no contact rules and how often we should contact the same customers for surveys?
Yeah, absolutely, Connie. So, generally speaking, for feedback gathering, it's important to have an application or functionality that can be configured to not contact customers on certain days, like Christmas Day or Sunday or after 8 p.m. or whatever the case may be. But most feedback gathering applications at this point in time have the logic and configurability to not contact customers outside of those periods. With respect to contacting the same customer, we generally recommend to limit contacting a given customer for a survey to once every 30 to 45 days. So if a customer calls into a call center today and they are contacted about a survey, even if they don't complete it, we would recommend not contacting that customer again for a 30 to 45 day period. We have some clients that do 15 days, others that do 60. That should also be configurable within the feedback gathering mechanism. But generally speaking, a 30 to 45 day window we found to be a pretty safe window for contacting the same customer again for another survey.
Great, thank you. And another one from the last section of the presentation, Dave's reporting section. How does one go about benchmarking performance against other companies?
Yeah, so there's a few different ways of doing that. There's industry groups out there that collect benchmarks and share them with kind of their internal industry members. And then what we found is groups like the Temkin Group, they do an excellent job in this area in terms of really looking at customer experience across different industries as a whole. So you can begin to kind of see what are overall satisfaction rankings across like cable and telecommunications, airlines, healthcare, and make some find some industry benchmarks with regard to that as well.
Great. So that's all that we have for the Q&A. I'm going to turn it over to Chip for one last wrap up, and thank you again to everybody for joining us today.
Thanks, Connie. Yes, and thanks again, everyone, for joining us. Just a quick 20-second overview of Sky Creek. If you aren't familiar with us, with 20 years experience providing customer experience solutions through our eTouchPoint platform that we've talked about today, and also similar levels of experience with our customer contact solution. That's an automated messaging platform that does things like bill pay reminders and appointment reminders, and a lot of integration with workforce management systems to ensure that our clients can contact their customers very quickly with service critical information. We've served Fortune 20 clients for a long time, but also work with large and medium-sized businesses worldwide in a variety of different industries like cable and broadband, energy, utility, and several others listed here. And then finally, if you have any questions about anything from the webinar today or any questions about our organization or service offering, feel free to reach out to either David or myself. Our contact information is listed here. And everyone should be receiving a thank you message with links to the content from today's webinar. Connie, do you want to close things out quickly?
Sure. I just wanted to thank everybody again for joining us. And as Chip just mentioned, we will be following up with the webinar replay. You should be getting it by email. Feel free to watch it, share it with others. And I know Chip and Dave would welcome any questions you have. And anyone who is interested in the strategy assessment can also look forward to hearing from Chip and looking forward to a time to schedule that up as well.
Great. Thank you, Connie. Thanks, Dave. And thanks, everyone, for attending. Have a great day.